Good afternoon. You're watching News 18 Global with me, Ridhima Bhatnagar. Let's begin with our top focus. Former United States President Donald Trump is expected to be arraigned at the Barrett Prettyman Federal Courthouse in Washington, D.C. Now, you would remember that the former president has been indicted for the third time this year, this time in connection with the 2020 election interference probe helmed by special counsel Jack Smith. Now, Trump has been charged on 4 different counts, including conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, obstruction of an attempt to obstruct an official proceeding, and conspiracy against rights. Trump is now scheduled to appear at Washington, D.C. Federal Courthouse on Thursday at 4 p.m. local time, which means somewhere around 1:30 a.m. Indian Standard Time. Remember, Trump has already been indicted by a Manhattan grand jury in March for business fraud in connection to hush money payments made to adult entertainer Stormy Daniels. He was indicted in connection with the classified documents probe in the month of June. This spells even more trouble for the Republican frontrunner ahead of the 2024 presidential elections. Let's now explain what does this indictment really mean, what are the big points and the charges. Now, the first point goes on to say that the former president Donald Trump tried to create an atmosphere of mistrust after the U.S. elections. The other point it goes on to say is the Republican tried to change the U.S. election results for months together. What it further goes on to say is the former U.S. president even lied after he was warned by top officials. Also goes on to say Donald Trump knew his lies about the U.S. election were false, but he still went forward. Let's also now bring in our colleague Sanjay Suri, who in fact is standing by. Sanjay, the legal troubles for the former U.S. president only seem to be increasing. The third indictment that came yesterday, very damning charges. If proven, if convicted, the former president could see years as far as the jail term is concerned. But none of that seems to be phasing or hindering his plans as far as his 2024 presidential bid is concerned.
Well, on the face of it, he is certainly putting a brave face on it, and the results seem to back that for the moment. But this is now beginning to catch up. We have this very odd phenomenon of 2 streams running in parallel in opposite directions, the legal going one way and the political going the other way. Legally, he seems to be getting deeper and deeper into trouble. Politically, he is on a high and in fact getting higher. Now, it is not to say that the trends will necessarily continue as they are at present. It's a long way to go before all the run-up by way of the primaries at the beginning of next year, leading on, of course, to the election on November the 5th. But at the moment, clearly, politically, he has not suffered, though we are beginning to see some of the loyal Republicans beginning to distance themselves from that unambiguous support for Trump that we saw earlier. Even Ron DeSantis, who is presenting himself as Trump the second, unfortunately for him, Trump the first is still in the way. He too is beginning to waffle. So there is some uncertainty there. But clearly this is a legal trouble for him. And the trouble is not just that he got it wrong or even that he lied. Lies is immoral but not necessarily criminal. The question will be whether he knew he was lying. Then that would be an act of misleading and an act of disruption. And if that is upheld, then Trump is in serious legal trouble.
Sanjay, I just want to quickly talk to you about in terms of some reactions that are coming in. One of the most interesting reactions that have come in is from Mike Pence. Some other reactions that you're picking up as well?
Well, Mike Pence is the critical person here. He was the vice president. He was the one that the Trump loyalists approached to try to overturn the results. Mike Pence refused. He said then, and he has been saying again over the last few days, that he put the Constitution above loyalty to Trump, that he would always do so, and he did so in the past. It is of critical importance that Pence's notes of conversations have been handed over to the grand jury. So that was considered when the grand jury took the decision to support the indictment leading up to the arraignment later today. So Mike Pence is the most critical witness here and not an insubstantial witness. He was the key man in all this.
Sanjay.
With that, evidence now piling up against Trump. This is bad news for Trump.
Agreed. Sanjay, unfortunately, we'll have to leave that conversation there. Thanks a lot for getting us all those details, some other reactions and reports coming in as well.
I'm Eric Tucker. I cover the FBI, Justice Department, and national security for the Associated Press. Former President Donald Trump is set to make his first court appearance in Washington on federal charges that he sought to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. He'll be in federal court in Washington on Thursday afternoon for his initial appearance. We're expecting former President Trump to fly into Washington in the hours before his arraignment. He's expected to show up in court, where he's likely to be booked and processed. Outside the court, there have been people gathering. Members of the media, for instance, have long been staking out that location, tracking each and every movement of the grand jury, including as the indictment was approaching. And so this is going to be unfolding in a moment of both high anticipation from the public, but also tight security from law enforcement who have been showing up at the building and taking steps to make sure that that area is secure. This arraignment is going to take place before a federal magistrate, and that's important because that's going to be different than the trial judge who's going to be overseeing the case moving forward. So a magistrate is the one who oversees that initial appearance, and she's expected to honestly accept the not guilty plea on Trump's behalf. We're already beginning to get a sense of some of the contours of the defense. We're not expecting to hear that really articulated during the first initial appearance, which tends to be a perfunctory pro forma court date. But we're hearing a couple different things. One of the defenses potentially is that Donald Trump's actions are protected by the First Amendment, that he had a right to protest against an election that he believed had been stolen from him and that his advisors were saying had been stolen from him. It's worth noting that the indictment itself actually preemptively acknowledges that fact. It acknowledges that somebody has the right to believe that they were the victim of fraud. They have the right to complain that the election was stolen, and they have the right to lawfully challenge the results. What the Justice Department says separates free speech from the criminal conduct are the actual steps that they say Donald Trump took to advance these criminal schemes. And they say that is conduct that is not protected by the First Amendment. One of the other lines of defense that we've been hearing is that, and we've been hearing this from Trump himself, is that lawyers who are connected to Trump told him about these schemes, told him that this was permissible, and Trump has repeatedly indicated that he relied on that guidance from lawyers. And in fact, many of the unidentified co-conspirators who are referenced in the indictment are themselves lawyers. But again, that's going to be a very hard road to go down for the defense as a legal argument and legal defense.
Another indictment from U.S. Special Counsel Jack Smith was unveiled on Tuesday against former U.S. President Donald Trump, this time concerning his efforts to undo his 2020 election loss to U.S. President Joe Biden. The court papers charge Trump with 4 counts. They include conspiring to defraud the U.S. by preventing Congress from certifying Biden's victory and to deprive voters of their right to a fair election. Now, the indictment itself, it gets into Trump's actions in the days and weeks after it became clear that he had lost the presidential election to Biden. It describes efforts to get state officials to prevent from certifying their election results, and his own attempts to get his vice president, Mike Pence, to not let the electoral certification of Biden's election win move forward when it came before the U.S. Congress on January 6th, 2021. And what's most interesting here is that this is conduct describing what he did during the past election as he once again runs for election to try and become the Republican nominee in 2024, and then, if he wins that nomination, to try and be back in the White House.
I want the American people to know that I had no right to overturn the election. And then on that day, President Trump asked me to put him over the Constitution. But I chose the Constitution, and I always will. I mean, I really do believe that anyone who puts themselves over the Constitution should never be president of the United States. And anyone who asks someone else to put themselves over the Constitution should never be President of the United States again. Now, with regard to the substance of the indictment, I've been very clear. I had hoped it wouldn't come to this. I had hoped that this issue and the judgment of the president's actions that day would be left to the American people.